Now we're going to start Daf Samach Gimel Amid Beis. On Daf Samach Gimel Amid Aleph, we had the suffix of Rabbi Bar Chama. Rava Tashma, Rava says, if you read the Mishnah, you can be poshet the suffix of Rabbi Bar Chama. The Mishnah says, in the case of a Nazir who contracted Tumah, if he finds out about it, Ad Shalo Gilach, before his Giluach, and it says, Ben Kach U Ben Kach, whether it was a case of Tumah Yedua or a case of Tumas Tahom, Soser, it's Soser, his Nazirus. Says Rava, let's analyze this. Hechi Dam, what is the case that the Mishnah is addressing? When did he find out about his Tumah? Idi is Yadale, Bisoch Malos. What's the chiddush? If he finds out he became Tomei during his Yemei Nazirus, right before the 30 days passed, then Tzricha L'meima, do I need to tell you that it's Soser's Nazirus? That is the classic case of Tuma HaSoseres Nazirus. So that's a case of Nitma Toch Malos. And the Mishnah didn't have to tell me that. Because if he found out about it during Malos, that's 100% Nitma Mitoch Malos. Elalav, by process of elimination, we have no choice, but rather we have to assume liachar malos, that he only found out about his tumah after the malos, on the day of Havas Karbonosim, on day 31, before his Giluah. So the Mishnah now wants to mechadesh that even though he found out about it after the malos, nevertheless, it says ben kachu ben kas soser es naziruso, because he found out about it before Giluach Ushmamino. Now we can see clearly that the Zmana Tuma is Kovea. Forget about the idea, because this would be a idea of after the Malos, which according to Rabbi Eliezer, on the Yom Havas Karbonos, even before he brings his Karbonos, it's not Soser's Nazirus. And Shmamino, we see that the Zman of the Tumah is Kovea. So even though he found out about it after the Malos, nevertheless it's Soser's Nazirus because he contracted Tumah during the course of his Malos. Gemara says, the suffix of Rami Bar Chama is still outstanding. Even though you've determined that the Mishnah is definitely talking about a case where he found out about his tumah after the malos, otherwise there'd be no chiddush. But still, now we have to wonder what is the nature and the extent of the stiras hanazirus in this case, where he contracted tumah during his malos, but only found out about it after his malos. Kulo soser? Is it soser the entire 30 days, like any nazir who became tameh during the days of his nazirus? And he's got to start from scratch. Oh, or should we say Shiva Soser? That it's only Soser the Shiva Yomim, which means he has to wait until after he is purified, and then he's finished. He'll bring his karbanos, he'll do his tidlachas, and get endik tamaisa. Because this is Tuma Liachar Malos. So the Gemara points out, Laman, the suffix of Rabbi Bar Chama, who is it going on? Elam and the Rabbanon. The Rabbanon were of the opinion. Again, back on Daf Tez Zayin, as we mentioned on Omen Aleph, that in Nazir shenitma b'yom shloshim v'echad before he brought his karbanos is soser es kol shloshim yom pshita de kulo soser. There's no doubt about it that he's soser the entire 30-day period, because according to the Rabbanon, even if he contracted tumah on this day itself, and it was before he brought his karbanos, so it's considered as if his malos had not been completed, and therefore it's soser hakol. How much more so when he was nitba during his malos? And even if we would say basar yediyah azlinon, okay, fine. So basar yediyah azlinon means now when he finds out, and it's on day 31 before he brought his karbanos, imagine as if he was tamei now. Even if he contracted tumah now, it would be soser as nazirus according to the Rabbanan. So by process of elimination, the suffix of Rabbi Bar Chama has to be according to Rabbi Eliezer. But the Gemara asks the following question: V'i Rabbi Eliezer, if we go according to Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that after the Malos, Tumah is not soteres. If he contracted Tumah after the Malos, he only has to wait the 7 days to be Mitayr himself. Then Kol Achar Malos Shiva Soser. And now, once again, it becomes Pshita L'chora that, according to Rabbi Eliezer, since he only found out about the Tumah after his Malos, namely on day 31, therefore it's not Soser anything more than the 7 days. But there's a whole different story over here, because here he didn't contract the Tumah after the Malos. That was Rabbi Eliezer. Here he contracted the Tumah during the Malos. He just didn't know about it. And now we understand the suffix of Rabbi Bar Chama, according to Rabbi Eliezer. Malacha, Hani Mili, when does Rabbi Eliezer hold that there's only a steer of Shivas Yomi? That's Ki Nitbach Malos. He contracted Tumah after the Malos. But Vahai, but our case, Rabbi Bar Chama's case, is a whole different case. Although it's true he only found out about it after the Malos, but Lifnei Malosu, the Tumah took place, his contact with Tumah, and he contracted Tumah during the Malos. And therefore Rabbi Eliezer would be molded in such a case, since he contracted Tumah during the Malos, it's Soser Kol Shloshim. O Dilma, shall we say, Shani Hacha, this is a different case. Why? The Yediyah Achar Malosi. And if we apply the principle of Basa Yediyah Zlinon, it's as if he contracted the Tumah today, and that's after the Malos. And therefore, according to Rabbi Eliezer, it's only going to be Soser Shiva. So basically, the vacillation of Rabbi Bar Chama could be reduced to the following question: is it Basa Yediyah Zlinon, Basa Tumah Zlinon? And now the Gemara wants to answer the question and be poshet the suffix of Rabbi Bar Chama. Umina. And this suffix itself can be determined based on our Mishnah. Ketani, it says in our Mishnah, that if no delo ad shelo gilach, he finds out about Tumas Tahom before the Giluah, is bein kach ubein kach soser. Meaning, it doesn't matter even if it's Tumas Tahom, it's Soser, Veloka Miflagi, and the stomach of this Mishnah, without any different, the Mishnah does not differentiate when did he become Tumah, and rather it all depends upon Yediyah Satumah, because it says in the Mishnah, no dolo. And therefore, if the Yediyah was before the Giluach, it's Soser. So that would mean that whether or not he had contracted Tumas Tahom or Tumah Yedua, since there was a Yediyah before Giluach, therefore it's Soser. And since the Mishnah doesn't make any distinction about when he actually contracted Tumah, then it would apply even if he contracted during his Malos. Just 1 second. Right, and this was all what? No dolo before his Giluach. But if we equate Yediyah with Tumah, then what would be the din if he contracted Tumah after the Malos, even before Giluach? He would only be Soser according to Rabbi Eliezer 7 days. That's the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. So there's no din of stira of the entire Tumah of 30 days if he contracted Tumah after the Malos. And here, when he finds out about it, and it was Tumas Tahom, and he only found out about it after the Malos, then if we equate that with contracting Tumah after Malos, namely Basa Yediyah Zlinon, therefore his Nazirus is not Nisteris, it's only Shivas Yom. Tana Rabbanan, now we have a new dimension, and that is Hamotzi Mes Mutal Rachva Shel Derech L'Truma Tomei Ubi Nazir Ubi Osa Pesach Tar. So this, as we said earlier on Daf Samach Gimel Amud Aleph, is based on Allah Shvi Sinai that the Torah was matir tumas tahom in the case of Nazir and also Pesach. Now we get into the nitty-gritty details of tumas tahom. Kishe'ein lo makom lava. So the mess completely covered the width of the road, and it's impossible that he went past this road without being mal al mes. If, on the other hand, we have a suffix whether or not he was mile al mes, because the mess didn't stretch all the way across the road from one side to the other, so it's possible that he sort of swung around the mess and he was not mile al mes, is afli trumatar, and now we're talking about tuma b'rshus harabim and suffix tuma b'rshus harabim sveikotar. But medvar mamurim, when do we say that as far as truma is concerned, he's tameh, is kshematzo sholem? The body of the dead was in one hole. But in the case of Meshubar Meforak, it was Meshubar Lechalok and Meforak Levarim, is then Afilu Ein Makom Lavar. There still is a suffix to Rishus Harabim, even if there's no place to go by. Let's say half the mess covers this half of the road, and the other half of the mess closes the other half of the road. So if he's going down the road, then he's for sure going to be Ma'al al Mes. But Chayshin and Shema Prokim Ovar, we can still consider it a suffix, because maybe he didn't go down the middle of the road. Maybe he took a turn and he was not Ma'al al Mes. So since it's only a suffix, therefore it's Tuma versus Harabim Sveikotar. Ubekever, however, even if we find the mess is Meshuba Mefurak, but he was buried in a kever, which means that between the dead and the ground there's a poseach tefach, is that afilu Meshuba Mefurak Tame. Why? Because that's the din of kever. Oh, here it is. Mipnei shekever mitzarfa. The kever, if it has that empty space between the dead and the ground of a tefach, yesh bo halal tefach ben a mes la kever, is then it's metame bi oel, and that's true for any part of the kever, even if he was mile on that part of the kever which has no mess in it, but there's one continuous din and status of a kever. So here we don't have a suffix because we know he was vade mile al hakever. But medvar, when do we raise the possibility that he was over ben aprokim? In other words, if the mess was broken up, maybe he walked in between those pieces of the mess, and therefore we could apply the principle of suffix tar b'shus harabim sveiko tar, because the suffix that's only b'mahalik b'ragla. He's just walking; he's not carrying anything. But if he's carrying toun, right, he's got a burden on his back and it stretches in both directions, and he himself, moves around from one side to the other, then we assume for sure he was mile al mes. Oh, rachuv, or let's say he's riding in a wagon, tame, because the parts of the wagon certainly were mile al hames. Lefisha mahalik baraglo efshalo shlo yiga. If he was walking by foot, straight up, he's vertical, maybe he'll somehow tiptoe through the prokim, and he never came in contact with the dead. And not only lo yasa, there was no tumas hesed, and lo yal, there was no tumas ola. And therefore we apply the principle of suffix to rishus rab, but ton or rachu, if he's holding on to a burden that stretches over his back and beyond, or he's rachuv in an agola, shlo yiga, shlo yasid, v'shlo yahid. And that's the case of Harei Tuma, and therefore we cannot be Mitayim Misof. But Medvar, when do we have this special kula that's derived from Allah Moshe Sinai of Tumas Tahom in Nazir and Osa Pesach? That's only Betumas Tahom. Avol Betumi Yedua Shlosh Tantmein. If there's someone on the face of the earth who knows about it, then Shlosh Tantmein. all the three cases in the Mishnah Tameh, meaning someone who came in contact with Truma, or Nazir, or an Osa Pesach, they're all Tmeim. There's no Kula in a case where it was Tumah Yedua. Ve'ezi Tumas Tahom, Kol She'ein Makira Echad B'Sof Hom. Not even one person at the end of the globe knows about it. Like, for example, a mess that's covered by Offer. Maybe he walked under Chas Shalom, this, and he got an avalanche. He was buried under the Offer. But Makira Echad B'Sof Hom, if someone somewhere in the face of the earth knows about this Tumah, Ein Zu Tumas Tahom. That's called already Tumah Yedua. Even though he himself, when he passed over there, he didn't know about the Tumah. But it doesn't matter. The Tumah is objectively a Tumah Yedua because there's someone on the face of the earth who knows about it. If the Tumah was covered over by straw or by pebbles, and it's not Yedua, there's no one in the world who knows about it, and maybe the mess was buried by an avalanche, then it's called Tumas Tahom. Another case, I'm sorry, in contrast, we have the case by Mayim. If the mess, Nebuch, was drowned in water and it's floating on the water, or Bafela, or it's in a dark place, so in all these cases, there is part of the mess that's exposed. Ein Zu Tumas Tahom, because you can look into the water or into the Nekikei Asloim, or if you look with Araner during the nighttime, you'll be able to see it. And that's not Tumah Mechusa. Tumah Tahom has to be Mechusa in such a way that you don't have a possibility of seeing it. Now, Rashi says in Masechet Psachim that even if before lo hikir ba adam yolam, not one person in the world knew about this tumah, it's not tumas tahom, because it's not mechusa, and there are parts of it that are exposed, and re'uya hi liyadia ulahakara. So again, it's not a question of whether before in actuality there is someone on the face of the earth who knows about it, but if the situation and the reality is that the tumah is partially exposed, and therefore it's re'uya. Again, the language was re'uya lios yedua. That's enough to make it into classic tumah and be mafkia tumas tahom. V'lo amru tumas tahom. So if they found out about it after his giluach or after the siyas pesach, it's tar el v'mes bilvat. That only applies exclusively to tumas mes. So if you have tumas mes sheni yedua, then we're mekil in Nazir and also Pesach. But shar tumas, like tumas ziva, is even if it's any yedua, not one person in the world would know about it. Nevertheless, there's no din of tumas tahom, and a Nazir would have to be soser's nazirus. Now I'm looking here for a footnote which I can't find, because maybe it never existed, that's why. And I thought we said that tumas ziva is not soteris. Do you remember such a thing, Rabbi, by any chance? I don't remember where it was. It's way, way earlier in the Masechet. All right. In any event, the Gemara in Sota derives Sofik Tumashus Arabim, Sofik Tumashus Yachid from Sota. And there's a Mishnah in the fourth parak of Taros that says that even though every Sofik Tumashus Yachid is Tameh, there's one exception. And that exception is called Sof Sofa b'mayim. Now, a Nazir who contracted tumas tahom, and he only finds out about it after Giluach, is not soser as Nazirus. Ketzad, what would be tumas tahom? Yorad, the Nazir went down into the mikvah, into the Morah, to be Tovel, and then there's a mess that's tzaf al pnei hamayim. Kizayis min ha-mess that's tzaf al. That's not tumas tahom, because the mess is goli lakol. Everybody could see it. And now the Gemara is going to clarify that even though when he finds a mes tzaf al hamayim, he's nitma misafek, and that's because of the application of the general principle of safek tumish yachid sveiko tame. Nevertheless, if he finds a sheretz al pnei hamayim, he's not tame, because the din of tuma saf al pnei hamayim is that in safek he's tar even in rishus hayachid. Safa eina mitama le'inyan sheretz. In other words, that halacha that if there's a suffix, whether or not a person came in contact with this tumah, if it's saf al pnei hamayim, he's not going to be tamim misafek. That only applies to tumas sheretz. But in tumas oil, tumas mes, the regular din applies that if the suffix is b'sarabim, it's sveikotar. If it's a suffix, b'shasayach, it's sveikotam. Tisanya, suffix tumat safa. Oh, now we have machlok shin Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon, which is going to occupy our minds for a good deal on the next stop. So we have suffix tumat safa. Now, where is this tumah? It's floating on the water. Is it inside a vessel or is it not? So the Tanakama is of the opinion that bein bekalim ubein bekarka, in other words, whether it's inside a vessel or it's floating on the surface of the water on the karka, tahora. In the case of Safi, he doesn't know if he came in contact, he's taught even in Rishus HaYachid. Rav Shimon Omer bekalim tmea bekarka Torah. That this halacha l'moshe Sinai, that Safi tuma tahora, tuma tzafa is tahor, that's only with regard to tzafa al pnei hamayim. But if it's tzafa bekli, then it's not called tzafa betoch hamayim, it's in the kli. And therefore, in the case of safek versus yachid, it would be sveiko tameh. And here we begin, Daf Samach Dalid, and we'll try to make a little bit of progress here on Daf Samach Dalid. My time at the Tanakama, the Gemara now wants to analyze this machlokes. Omer Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avudimi, we found a contradiction between two verses. Ksiv, in one verse it says, in Vayikra Yud Aleph, Al tishaktus nafshosecha bechol hasheretz hashoretz. And the simple pshat is bechol makom shu shoretz, whether or not he's on the karka, he's on the mayim. But on the other hand, ksiv, in that same chapter, it says v'zelachem atome b'sheretz hashoretz al haaretz. And it sounds like the tumah only applies if the sheretz is on the ground, but not a sheretz which is tzaf al pnei hamayim. Okay, so how do we reconcile this? Vadei mago tame, suffik mago tar. If it's absolutely clear, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that a person came into contact with the sheretz, he's tame, even though the sheretz is tzaf al pnei hamayim. And that's the pasuk that's metame every sheretz hashoretz. However, if he has a doubt whether or not he came in contact with the sheretz, then he's not tame if the sheretz is shoretz al pnei hamayim. And we're going to say sveiko tar. So this is the shita of the Chachamim, and the Torah doesn't make a single indication or an allusion to any differentiation between sheretz hatzav al pnei hamayim al gabi karka levein sheretz hashoretz hatzaf al gabi mayim b'toch hakli. So therefore, the Tanakama holds that in both cases, sveiko tar, even in Rishus Hayom. Rabbi Shimon, why does he differentiate between sheretz hashoretz b'mayim al gabi karka, where sveiko tar, as opposed to sheretz hashoretz b'mayim al gabi kli? And there he's going to apply the principle of safek tumish seyoch sveiko tar. My time. Omar Ula says that Rabbi Shimon was bothered by a different contradiction in the verses. Ksiv, the Torah says in Vayikra Yud Aleph, Ach Mayon Now, in the end of the pasuk, it says, "Ach mayon ubar mikveh mayim yetar," and it sounds like the pasuk is saying that safek tumat safal hamayim is tahora without any distinction. But on the other hand, in the next part of the pasuk, it says yitma. And yitma sounds like he's tamei even in the case of safek tuma hatzafa b'mayim. Okay, so how do we reconcile this? Says Reb Shimon, we should differentiate between safa b'kelim, that if the tuma and the mayim is inside a vessel, then we say tamei. And that's the case of the pasuk that's mitame even tumat safa. However, in the case of safa tum b'mayim shebekarka, it's not inside a kli, then tar, then we will be mitayer because of the din of tzafal pnei hamayim. That's the case that's being addressed by the pasuk that's mitayer in a mayim and a bar because they are mayim hamechunasim al gabi karka. So this is where we'll stop for today, and we're up to Tana Rabbanon on the top of Daf Samach Daled. Let's make a note of it. And I'll wish you a great day. Thank you so much.